So welcome in everyone to the February DenverScript meetup. It's a great turnout. I appreciate you all being here. Who here is it your first time at DenverScript? Sweet, sweet. Welcome in. Hopefully you'll enjoy yourself, and we'll see you next time. I'm getting ahead of myself though. We have a whole meetup to do. Welcome. My name is CJ. I am a co-organizer here, along with Cass is another co-organizer. She's back there, yep. We have a few other co-organizers that aren't here tonight, but tonight we are your points of contact. We do have a code of conduct here at DenverScript, and I'm going to read you some summarized bullet points of it, but the full code of conduct is at denverscript.com/code of conduct. So DenverScript is dedicated to providing a harassment-free community for everyone. Participants violating these rules may be sanctioned or expelled from the community at the discretion of the DenverScript organizers, myself and Cass. And I guess Ched is like interim organizer. Ched is giving a talk tonight, but if he's free, you can chat with him too. If you're being harassed, notice that someone else is being harassed, or have any other concerns, please contact a DenverScript organizer immediately. If you don't feel comfortable doing it in person, denverscript@gmail.com, we will handle it. And here are some ground rules for the meetup. Please be kind. Don't talk over the organizers or the speakers. You all are doing a wonderful job of that right now. And during the Q&A sections of each of the talks, please ask constructive questions. We don't like gotcha questions or like trying to prove a point. Those are never any fun. So just be kind, be curious, and we'll all have a good time. We're live right now on the internet. Let me actually check to see. Yeah, looks good. We're live. So if you enjoy anything you see here tonight, DenverScript meetup on YouTube, you'll be able to rewatch the whole thing. And with that in mind, if you are asking a question during the Q&A, be sure to grab the mic because we want the people watching at home to be able to hear you. And thanks to our sponsors. So this wonderful space you are in is called Code Talent, and they are a technical talent agency as well as host of many, many meetups, and they're awesome. So if you are looking for a job, or if you're a company looking to hire people, definitely reach out to Code Talent. They are the best in the business. And tonight's food was sponsored by the lovely Cass. So if it's not required, but if you would like to throw any money her way, Cassandra-T on Venmo. I will leave that up for exactly 30 seconds if you decide to send her money. No, really no pressure. No pressure. Okay, that was only 15 seconds, but I'm getting antsy. Cassandra-T on Venmo. We are always looking for sponsors, so if you or your company would like to sponsor the food so we don't have to do it ourselves, let us know, denverscript@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And also, we're always looking for speakers. So denverscript.com has a form where you can submit a talk. And do we have speakers for next month? We have one speaker for next month. Typically, we like to do like one short talk, one long talk. We actually have 2 long talks for you tonight. But talks of all kinds, of all lengths, of all difficulties, so beginner talks, advanced talks. Honestly, it doesn't even have to be about JavaScript. If you want to talk, we would love to have you. So denverscript.com has all the info you will need to submit. And that's all I got. So usually we do JavaScript news, but we want to get right into the talks. So your first speaker is Ched. He's going to be talking about Redwood. We're going to let him get set up, and then I will introduce him properly.
talking? Oh, is it too close to my? How about now? Is that good? Is that good? That good? That good. Microphone check, microphone check, microphone check. I'll be back here. How's that?
You might need to move it closer. Like we can. Go for it.
Can you hear me? Hello, microphone check.
That's the winner. Okay.
Oh, that sounds good. Everybody seems happy with that one.
Nice.
Okay.
All right. So Ched is a software engineer by day. Wait, actually, let me doing multiple jobs here. Ched is a software engineer by day and endless project enthusiast at night. He frequently changes frameworks for the fun and pain of it. So Ched is going to be talking about RedwoodJS and specifically his experience building an app with it. So please give it up for Ched.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Cheddar. Today I'm going to talk about RedwoodJS. It's a full stack framework. I call this full stack framework IRL because I used it on a real project for the past year and a half. I've been building with it. Just curious, has anyone heard of RedwoodJS? Hands? Okay, okay. Anyone used it? Okay. There's a lot of frameworks out there. I like to change them every year just for the hell of it. So I built this project. And a little bit about me. My name is Cheddar. I'm a software developer or engineer, whatever you want to call it. My portfolio site is Ched.dev if you want to check me out. On the socials, I do streaming on the projects that I work on live on Twitch, and I upload those archives to YouTube afterward if you're more of a YouTube person. And when Twitter X is not being hostile, I hang out on there sometimes as well. All right, so first of all, what is RedwoodJS? Well, here's their marketing site right here. It's a full stack web framework designed to help you grow from side project to startup. Mine is a side project. It's not going to go to startup level, but the reason they say that is because it can start small and grow into massive needs if you need to get very big with it. So it can scale up in that sense. Here's some GitHub stats for you. It's an MIT licensed project, which means it's open source. It's free to use, free in your projects. There's 16,000 stars on GitHub right now, 10,000 closed issues, and 10,000 plus commits on there. The first commit was back in June 2019. It made it to V1 in April 2022. And as of a couple weeks ago, they're now on version 7 in February 2024. So it's been going on for quite some time. It's got some good base on it. I think it's going to keep growing and keep getting more popularity in the future. So keep your eye on it. Another interesting little tidbit is that the co-creator of RedwoodJS is Tom Preston Warner, who is also the co-founder of GitHub. So it's got a lot of good community members in it, core team members, all that fun thing. When I came in today, I met someone in the audience who said they were a previous core team member for Redwood. That was really exciting. And I assume he's here to tell you everything you need to know about it now. No, I'm just kidding. I won't put him on the spot like that. So what technologies make up RedwoodJS? Well, let's start with the backend. This is going to be a wall of text for you because there is a lot of features in Redwood. So first of all, there's a Fastify API server. That's a Node.js server. It can run serverless or serverful for you. There's Prisma, which manages the database and gives you an ORM to access your database. GraphQL, which is built on Yoga and Envelop. There's Auth with 11 plus providers. There's webhooks, Redis cache, and pre-rendering for SEO purposes. In the future, they're going to work on React Server component support. And there's a mailer, which lets you write emails in React Email or MJML. There's real-time with GraphQL live queries and subscriptions. And they've recently added Sentry error and performance monitoring as well. On the front end, it's React and TypeScript. There's an Apollo GraphQL client. There's support for Chakra UI, Tailwind CSS, and Mantine to be able to wedge those in there. There's router layouts and pages concepts, pretty common across a lot of frameworks these days. There's cells, which are lifecycle components. I'll go a little deeper into what those are and how to use those later on. There's forms, which is backed by React Hook Form. Toast notifications, which is React Hot Toast under the hood. And meta tags, which are powered by React Helmet. And finally, some tooling that's included as well. There's Yarn workspaces, so this is a mono repo setup. There's a Redwood CLI tool, which I use heavily in this project. Most of this presentation is going to be covering all of those Redwood CLI features that come in that tool. There's task scripts with Prisma access. So you can access your database when you want to write like local little NPM scripts. And there's CRUD scaffolding. There's internationalization, Jest for testing, Storybook so you can speed up your UI development, deployment with support for 7 different providers that they mentioned in the documentation, and linting and Vite powers the front end for it as well. And what did I build with it? So I built a website called unboxed.deals. It's a website for Amazon warehouse deals, which are like their open box or used items that they might have. And the features in it are that you can add and watch products for deal alerts. I won't talk much about all the things I did directly in this site, but we're going to go through the steps I kind of used to build this. Here's an example project architecture of what I have it set up as right now. On the left, you can see RedwoodJS, which handles the backend and the front end. The backend gives you some API routes at /API GraphQL. That's where you do most of your fetching from for the data. And then also any custom endpoints you make or serverless functions will be on API/whatever. So in my backend, I also make REST requests to an Amazon API to get some of the product and pricing information and then save that. I'm not going to be covering any of that in this talk just because it's not really related to Redwood and it's kind of a separate thing. I also hosted my database with Postgres. And then in the front end, at the root, I have the React application, which is making GraphQL Apollo requests to the backend for me. Currently, I'm hosting it serverful on a Railway app. Previously, I was hosting it serverless on Vercel. I'll talk a little bit more about why I made that switch near the end. So setting up a RedwoodJS app, you have a yarn create command, and this will basically generate the app for you, which would be like cloning it from GitHub and then initiating a Git repo and setting that folder up for you locally. It doesn't do much more than that right now, but it's just nice to have the little steps all rolled into one. This is the app file structure that you get when you generate a new application. On the far left there, you can see a screenshot of the top level. You can see it's mostly configuration files, and there's a few folders in there. We're going to mainly focus on the API and the web. Those are the 2 Yarn workspaces that you'll be working out of. There's also the scripts, which handles the NodeJS scripts that you can generate through Redwood. So in the API, you have the schema Prisma file. If you've ever worked with Prisma, it's going to be pretty much the same as working at it outside of Redwood. They have some additional wrappers for you that will help you run the Prisma commands along the way. In the source folder, you have directives, which are like GraphQL middleware. It allows you to like transform data and do some things in between the queries. You also have functions, which are API endpoints, or the serverless functions, if you get those along the way, if you use those instead of the endpoints. There's GraphQL folder, which holds the schema definition languages files. Let me take a water break real quick. I'm talking kind of fast. So there's the schema definition files, which are basically GraphQL's type and definitions that you use when you query the GraphQL stuff. And there's the lib folder, which holds the auth and cache and related Redwood stuff that are basically like when you generate those things in Redwood, you'll get those files generated in there. There's services, which holds the query resolvers, and that'll be most of the data. When you try to query your data, you're going to get that. You're going to have services for those. And again, that's all served from Fastify in the API. On the front end, there's Vite, which serves and builds the web. You get your standard assets, and you get all the components, layouts, pages. There's your standard app and routes files in there. If you've worked on any kind of React application, you'll see it's pretty similar in there. So the Redwood CLI tool is really what's going to generate most of the code for you. It has like all of these features in it. There's a few commands that you're going to see, like setup, which I use to set up the auth and cache, deploys, generators, all those kinds of things. There's the Prisma commands, which is the wrapper around anything you need to do with Prisma. There's yarn redwood generate commands, which generate a lot of the files for you. I use that heavily throughout building out this whole project. And finally, there's yarn redwood. These are kind of the top level commands like dev, execute, lint, serve, test, upgrade, those as well. These are not all of the commands that are included. These are mostly the ones that I used, but there's probably another, I don't know, 20 more commands or something like that. If you look into their documentation, you'll see there's a lot of features in there that they have included. So first, I'm going to set up a local auth provider. You can do that with yarn redwood setup auth db auth. And the local provider just means that it stores the users and stuff in my database. I'm not using a separate service. You can use other auth providers like Auth0, Clerk, Firebase, Supabase, those kinds of things. I just stored them locally because I wanted to keep them in my database. And this added an API endpoint for API auth, which has hooks that I can tie into that I'll use a little bit later on. And it also updates the GraphQL endpoint to use the auth, so you can lock down your GraphQL endpoints if you have some data that it's just behind authentication, or whether it's public or not. And it also added a lib for auth helper methods. So then to add the support on the front end, you can do yarn redwood generate db auth, and this is going to scaffold out all of the pages and routes for logging in, which is the login, sign up, reset password, forgot password. And if you've ever set up auth on your own, this is going to save you a day or two of time at least. If you've never set it up, it's going to save you a week of time. So this alone is like a huge benefit. I was super excited to see this in there. I basically just took these and kind of themed it on top of it. All the functionality is already there. They also added an auth provider to the app component, so you can use that in your React app. And this is an example of the auth hooks that they have. So when you set up the auth, they give you these hooks so you can tie into each of those life cycles of the whole auth flow. In this case, I tied into when the user is created. So I added environment variables so that I can turn on and off user registrations or invite codes. And I also send an email when the user is created to like send them a welcome, please sign up and, or enjoy the new app or whatever, instructions for more onboarding flow. That code was just some custom stuff I wrote with SendGrid, but Later on, I'm going to expand that some more. Next, I'm going to get into the generating data models. So if you've never used Prisma before, this is what it looks like to add a model in Prisma. You basically they have their own kind of language, schema language here. You do this, and then you can run Prisma commands, and that will generate the migrations for your database. I was using Postgres, so I need to have migrations. If you've ever worked with connects or those kinds of similar things, you're going to need that. And anytime you make changes in here, it's going to generate the migrations, like if you add a new property or if you add a whole new table, those kinds of things. It also generates the TypeScript types for all of the Prism models as well, so you can use that throughout your project on the front and back end. Next, generating product pages. So if you do yarn redwood generate scaffold product, it's going to create a whole bunch of stuff for you. It adds the product layouts and pages and service, which connects to your database, with tests, schema definition language file, CRUD form components, and all the routes. So once you've run this, I'm going to have the ability to enter into products into my whole app ready to go. So on top of this, I just kind of had to theme things and style it how I wanted to. I also use this to generate my product categories and article pages. And there's additional generators for specific pieces, such as components, cells, and functions, etc. I use a lot of the generators heavily to generate most of my pages. Here's an example of some of the pages that it generates for you. They're pretty simple and basic. If you have like an admin side where you don't care about styling, you can totally use these out of the box and just have them going. They've got validation on them and all that. Again, I just styled them on top of them to kind of customize them for how I want it on my actual site. And Redwood scripts, which were very useful for seeding. They can be used for anything. These are kind of like task scripts or node scripts, I would call them. You can use them for all kinds of things. They give you one for a seed file out of the box. I didn't actually use that one. I ended up making my own later on. So I made two scripts. One was to clean the database because the pricing info changes every hour. So after every hour, I run this command to clean out the old ones. And then I also you can pass in arguments pretty easily when you generate the script. It's easy to get them in there. And I also used one to refresh the pricing. So when I'm working locally in my dev environment, I can run the exec refresh pricing, and it will take the last prices, update the times on them, kind of like a seed in my local development. And building the UI. So now on the front end, I can run yarn, redwood, setup, UI, Tailwind, CSS. I use Tailwind for my project, and I built out a lot of styles on that. This just kind of sets up all the initial configuration to get Tailwind jammed into your project. It added post CSS, Tailwind, the Tailwind config, prettier Tailwind as well, and it converted the existing scaffold CSS, which was just from the CRUD components, to use the Tailwind at apply styles instead. And they also support Chakra UI and Mantine out of the box. These really only are running like the setup for these frameworks. You can put in any framework that's React compatible or CSS frameworks that you want in there. These are just generators to help get those up and running quicker for you. For routing, layouts, and pages, the scaffolder built these routes for me, and including this layout. What I like about it is that they name each of the routes, so I can use the routes instance and programmatically refer to the URL, or if it's a dynamic URL, I can pass in the data and it generates that URL for me. What's really handy with this is that if you go and change your route anywhere in the application, or in here in the route file, it's not going to break your whole app because it's always referring back to the one generator. If you change the name of your routes, that will also give you a TypeScript error if you need to update it. So you can safely change your routes anywhere else and not break the whole app. And layouts and pages are just kind of a basic parent-child pattern. There's nothing really fancy to it, but it's nice that they have that concept in there as well. So Redwood forms are based on React hook form. When you do the scaffold command, it generates these forms for you based on the Prisma model, and that includes the labels, the fields, the validation errors for each of the properties, as well as a toaster component which runs for each of the CRUD actions. So it says like item saved, item updated, those kinds of things. And what I actually changed was the validation rules and messages, the styling, and nested properties are nice with React hook form because you can do categories.dynamic category, and it will put it in like an object format for you, which is really handy. One more water break. And Redwood cells. So they have this concept of cells, and what it really is if you make a GET request or like a GraphQL request, it's going to go fetch the data. There's a loading state that'll automatically render that loading component for you. And then when the data comes back, it'll render either empty, failure, or success depending on how the data came back. So this removes a lot of boilerplate for that. When you have those throughout the app, I've used a lot of cells in my application, and I really like them. The brevity of it. It helps save a lot. I made some custom cells that also allowed some filtered versions, so you could bring the data back and then you can like search and filter within it. And that allowed me, I used like the After query hook so I could change some of that data. Most of the GraphQL queries were handled directly in the cells, but you can also use query or use mutation if you need to pull those in from Apollo client. Like I had to do that for my search query here. And Storybook is supported. So if you like Storybook, you just run one command. It will install all the dependencies and then run it for you. And you can do Storybook config or Storybook preview if you need to expand on that in any way. And a few more features that I added were the Redis cache. So you do yarn redwood setup cache Redis. It's going to generate a lib file for you. And one more water break. It's going to generate this lib file for you, which will give you a cache and delete cache key for product. For example, I use it for my product category here. It's going to try to go and fetch the cache. If it doesn't exist, it's going to make that query to the database, and then it will store it in the cache. And if I updated any of the cache stuff in the update, I manually delete the cache, and then that will kind of refresh it the next time someone tries to use it. It also supports memcache if you don't want to use Redis. So there's pre-rendering as well. In the routes, if you want to pre-render something, you just add the pre-render attribute. And if you have a dynamic route, you add a route hooks, so you can tell it all of the routes that you want to render. And there's also meta tags. So if you want to add metadata for each of the pages, you can do that for SEO purposes. That was my main use for pre-rendering. So if someone shares some of my pages somewhere, they see the little thumbnail icon and the title and all that on the social media sites. And Redwood Mailer, I haven't implemented it yet. This is a newer feature that came out kind of after I started developing my app, but this seems really cool, and I want to add it as a feature later on. It's a complete end-to-end design, development, and testing package for emails. So it's got all kinds of email providers: Resend, SendGrid, Postmark, Amazon, SES, and NodeMailer. You can choose the provider per each email. So if you're sending like transactional emails, you can use one. And if you're sending more of a newsletter type thing to a bunch of people, you can use another one. You can write your emails in React or MJML, which if you've ever written emails, you don't have to write tables and all that. That's really a big pain. And they also include Redwood Studio, which allows you to kind of sandbox the emails. You can send emails to it, see the emails in there, and you can debug it as like a desktop view or a mobile view, those kinds of things. So if you've ever had to develop emails, this is a huge godsend for that. For deployment, normally I wouldn't expect to see something handling deployment in a framework, but Redwood went to the next level and they made some commands to set up deployment for you, like setting up on Vercel. This will set you up on Vercel by configuring some specific things for that. And then they link to a guide to show you how to continue setting up the rest of it up on Vercel. You can configure the Redwood TOML file, which is like a YAML file, and change the API URL basically, and you can also include additional environment variables. By default, the environment variables are all for the server side, and you can tell it what you want to expose to the front end. And it supports both serverless and serverful deployments, which I will talk about in a second. So upgrades and maintenance. While I was building the application, they bumped 2 versions, and I had to do an upgrade at one point, and I was surprised at how easy the upgrades were. So the yarn, you can run yarn redwood upgrade, and it's going to do the package upgrades for you, and then it's going to show you a little link where you can link out to the documentation to see all of the breaking changes or all of the line-by-line changes you might need to do. I ran through this once, and it was super easy to use, very detailed. I'm honestly quite surprised it was that well. I've never had an upgrade go that well before. Usually you just rewrite the whole project. There's also a yarn redwood linter built in. You can run that linter along the way, keep your code nice and neat. And yarn redwood check, which will run a lint style check against redwood specific features like the environment variables that you expand or that you expose to the front end. All right, on to the likes and dislikes. So overall, I would say it is pretty good. I would definitely use Redwood again for another project. There's a lot of great features coming out all the time. Some of the likes that I had in there were the CLI commands. As you saw, there was a CLI command for everything. It basically generated about 80% of the code for me, and then I would complete the remaining 20% as needed. It's a full stack mono repo, which I really enjoyed. Easy to deploy, easy to work in. One more water break. The tech stack wrappers, what I mean by that is like the Prisma and GraphQL and React Hook stuff. They add little wrappers around all of those, and it's super easy to use. They document it well, but you can still go deeper into those if you need to. There's new feature additions, which happen all the time. While I was building this application, I wanted to add the Redis cache, and I was about to do it myself, and then they released it as a feature in the next major version. So I just upgraded and used that, and they also added pre-rendering, which I wanted, so I upgraded and added that as well. The serverless or serverful, I think this is really handy. I started out serverless because I wanted to do free tier on Vercel, which I did for a while. Then I ran into some issues with long-running tasks, so I ended up switching to serverful, but making that switch to Railway serverful, I didn't have to modify pretty much any of my code to make that happen. That kind of blows my mind that I can do that. Overall, the documentation is great. The community and support is great. I've used the Discord for support. I've used Discourse, which is like a forum for support as well. There's a lot of long form content on there. And the dislikes aren't really specific to Redwood, I would say. The scaffolding has a downside of generating a lot of code. Now that I've kind of gone through and generated all that stuff, I would like to go back and kind of refactor it to not repeat my code so much. It generates a lot for the layouts and pages and such, but that's an optimization that is on me now. And GraphQL, I'm not really a fan of GraphQL. I prefer REST. I like that GraphQL gave you the types and the field selecting, but on top of that, I just don't enjoy it as much. But I wouldn't knock them for choosing that choice. GraphQL is a great option for if you have a lot of different sources and you want to merge them all into one. The last one is pre-rendering is minimal, and this is kind of a temporary thing. Pre-rendering is, I would say, on like a basic level right now. It's really more for SEO purposes, but the next major version or the future of Redwood is moving to React Server components, so they're going to start getting a lot of those features you see in all those other frameworks. And that's my talk on RedwoodJS Full Stack Framework IRL. My name is Cheddar, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
Unmute it, the button underneath.
Did that work? Awesome. All right. You start us off.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I wanted to know, is it possible to opt out of using GraphQL if you don't want it, or any parts of the framework?
You could. I built a lot of just API endpoints, which are serverless functions or API endpoints. You could build things that way if you wanted to, and just do that, and drop the GraphQL completely. Yeah. I actually had a mix because I was using that extra API, and so that API, instead of making GraphQL requests back to my API, I made some REST endpoints and just hit those instead.
Other questions? Awesome. Here you are.
What made you decide to try Redwood?
So I was building this new site, and anytime I build a new site, I do kind of like to pick a new framework to learn something new. I hadn't worked with GraphQL before, I hadn't worked with Prisma, so those were big selling points for me. Also, that Redwood was the full stack framework. I didn't want to create two separate applications with the back end and the front end, so I like that it was all in one. If you've ever worked with Ruby on Rails, there's kind of a lot of influence there on all the scaffolding that comes with Redwood, but it's all in JavaScript. I never actually built a Ruby on Rails app, but I like a lot of the convention stuff they did. The main difference is Redwood it generates that code for you, but you can change it all you want to. Rails is very convention heavy, where you break out of that convention and it's very hard to use.
Nice. Other questions?
Do you have one?
No.
Do you have your code base handy?
I do.
Can you show us cells? Because that was like really interesting to me. So that was the thing where you had multiple exports in a file. You had export, loading, export, whatever the other things are. But the idea of kind of like reducing the boilerplate was really cool. I just want to see it in context.
Yes. Let me make sure I don't open any environment variables. Those are in the web SRC components. Product? Yes. So you can see I have some here like a new edit product cell, product card cell. One of the ones that I made later on. Oops. So this one, let me blow it up a little bit. So you can see here it's got the query. I have the query just stored in a separate file because the product ASIN cell is like a single product page. I just reuse that query there and set it there. I made a generic page loader for all the loading ones. This one has a special kind of empty one to say like I don't have any information on this product. If it doesn't exist, you can link out to it. Failure was kind of a generic failure. You need to go back and fix those ones. And then success just loads like a product card, which is a component that I have there. I'll show you a little bit real quick. Which one was it? It was in scans. So I made a scans cell or a filtered scan cell. So this one is kind of like cells plus some of my custom code on top of it. It's got the basic query up top. You have your GraphQL queries directly in there. So it finds all of the scans for the query. And then after I kind of run some specific filtering on it to make sure I don't show you any non-approved ones. basic loading, and an empty one, which is a little bit dynamic in this case. Sometimes I call them deals, sometimes I call them other things. So I made these kind of more higher order component functions. And then a generate success, because I reuse this for different types. So I made like an all deals scan, category deals, like specific different types of scan cells, but they're all using the same underlying code. So here I have all that. So this one alone is like, yeah, I have, 5, 6 cells in here alone, and just the boilerplate from all that saves a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then another question is, how long do you think it took you before you were comfortable with all of the like CLI tools? And because like there's a lot you have to
There's a lot
to get around. So yeah, how long did it take to get used to?
I did it incrementally. Like my app is a lot bigger than the commands that I told you, like the generators that I mentioned. I used quite a bit, and the scaffold one, I kind of used it maybe a couple times, and then from then I would generate like functions or cells or any of those things. I did it as a feature approach, like adding a new feature. But every time I needed to add a new feature, those were there. I knew exactly which code it would generate and exactly what I would need to modify on top of that. So I wouldn't say it was too hard. A lot of the code that gets generated, you go and look through it and it makes sense to you. It just feels like boilerplate code. Yeah.
Awesome.
How often do you find yourself using pre-render?
So I set up pre-render really just for a few routes, mainly because I was afraid of caching issues. So the product category articles, I used them for that. I didn't really use them on the deal pages because those change out every hour, so I didn't want to get into a bug situation where my deal prices are cached and they're now outdated. But I also did it for the single product pages for a bit too, and so that anytime you shared a product page, you would get that product image and the title and whatnot.
Any other questions?
Like 1 or 2 more questions.
Any questions from the chat?
No, but Brooks gives you claps in the chat.
Thank you, Brooks.
Was that a stretch or a, okay.
A big fan of testing here. I don't see any tests of any sort. Do you do that?
I should write more tests. But no, they did. So they do have a lot of great documentation on testing, and they generate a lot of testing-related things for you. I didn't get that far, though, to be honest. But I would not doubt that their testing integration is easy to use and easy to add. All of that, I would say that I do remember reading some documentation that went into a little bit of depth of like how to test these kinds of things and all that. So I would say their support is good, but I don't have firsthand experience with it.
Oh, okay, here we go.
So you said you've tried a lot of frameworks. What have you tried that's like most comparable to this, and like which did you like more?
So I've used Next in the past, like pre-13. I've built some apps with some of their API stuff. I felt their API side was pretty basic and kind of lacking, which on purpose, right? It wasn't like a full-featured thing. I wanted something that was more full-featured, and so that kind of is what drew me to RedwoodJS. I would say I knew I needed a fancier backend than just basic Next stuff. Also, when I was using Next way back in the day, I think the Next auth and stuff was pretty new and not full-featured. There's a lot of boilerplate code to get that working. So once I saw the generators for the auth, I was like, yes, I want that immediately. So I would compare it to like, so here's the thing, the Redwood's API side is way better than Next, but Next's rendering side server-side rendering is way better than Redwood's right now. I think Redwood will catch up to them because they were serverless for a while, so I don't think that was their focus. But now, because the trends have kind of shifted that way and every framework has adopted React server components, they are also on that wagon and will be getting there in the future.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
As we're transitioning speakers, I just want to encourage everyone, please grab pizza if there's pizza left, drinks, bathroom, but also please meet someone if you haven't yet. There are people hiring, there are people looking for work, there are people looking for friends. So I just encourage you to introduce yourself to a stranger if you're interested. No pressure. Cool. We'll be starting in like, I don't know, 5-10 minutes.
1 minute. Take your seats. We're going to get started in about 1 minute.
Yeah, it was like, something's off here. Let me check the resolution again. Yeah.
Control plus will like zoom the whole UI.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's harder to navigate.
I think it's good enough. It's too small. It's kind of blurry in addition to size. So.
All right, getting started very soon. Take your seats very soon. All right, time for your next talk. So Devin Wilson is your speaker. He likes to joke that he is a full stack software engineer, but in reality, you'll find him leaning toward backend work and contributing to front-end builds, infrastructure, and processes. He has always marveled at coworkers that tinker, and now he is one of them. When not writing code, you may find him 3D printing, playing mandolin, or flying a kite. So Devin is going to be talking about Docker-based CI builds for Node applications. Please give it up.
Hello. Check, check. Cool. Yeah, so I also remembered a fun fact about me, so I put it in here that Dev is both my nickname and my job. So fun fact. I realized this one time a long time ago. I created a folder called Dev Projects, and I was like, oh, it's kind of like dual meaning. That's awesome. Put GitHub and LinkedIn usernames there. Mostly I created this because I didn't create an actual info slide. I'm going to use no slides, so I hope you had your fill of slides from Ched's talk. And yeah, it was cool to hear about RedwoodJS, so thanks for that. So I'm going to be doing a talk on kind of Node.js and Docker. I kind of am bringing it down to kind of a simpler level. For two reasons. One, because some people might not have used these tools or not gone in depth in like creating Docker builds. And two, even if you have, sometimes we need to be reminded about how things actually work that we just ignore and that, appreciate them for the way that they work. So if you're not familiar with Docker, it's a containerization technology that has been around for like really not much more than a decade, which is pretty crazy. But it has really changed how we build and deploy applications. It used to be that you had to understand all of the system dependencies that an application needed to deploy that somewhere. And that was a notorious problem for application developers and operations teams, kind of information being lost in the process, and something gets deployed in production and breaks. So Docker helps with that. And I'll get into a little bit of like the developer workflow and some of those things. So I've written this up as a README, and if you are interested, either now or later, it's up on GitHub. It's a public repo under dwilson6, so you can go through and follow this along at some point. Yeah, so I'm just going to start by just bootstrapping a kind of basic Node.js project, really simple with almost nothing in it, just to kind of have a starting place for this. So, I'll kind of generally follow some of the guide here as I do this. So, yep. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So just to start out, just going to do kind of npm init project. I'm doing -y to skip the prompts because I just want the defaults. And then I just put in here a couple things just for fun because I have this repo as public. So I'm just kind of setting a couple project package parameters here. Also, fun fact, you can set them on the command line. If you didn't know that, I learned that while setting this talk. Setting the license to MIT just because that's what I put in the repo, and then enabling ES modules because, let's face it, why would I not do that for a new project? And so now I have a package.json in this repo. Basic stuff, not going to go into it much. Kind of simple project setup. So typically the first thing you're going to do is start creating your project, install some dependencies. In this case, I'm just going to create a simple Express API endpoint. So I'm going to do an npm install Express. So now it's in my dependencies. And then it creates a package lock JSON that has the specific version in there. And then I'm just going to start out and just kind of create a little index file with a really simple thing. I'm just going to copy this for the sake of time. Basically just simple single endpoint app that just returns the text hello world. And so typically, you do that. And then I'm going to go and run my app with Node. So now I have a server listening on that port. I'm going to go over to another terminal that I have, and I can just curl it to get the response back. Cool, my app works, that's great. Now I want to go and make this available to other people. So now, in a pre-Docker world, there's some decisions to make. So I could be editing this code on the actual server that is, out in the wild, and then just run a process. Not really the most recommended way to do it, but sometimes that's what you'd end up doing. Most of the time, you want to create some sort of artifact that gets deployed out to some other server. And so in order to do that, like if someone wants to modify or work with this project, they have to clone the repo, they have to have the right version of NodeJS, install dependencies, run the server. And that's just like the development workflow. And then for actually deploying it, we would essentially just create like a build sh script that, for whatever machine this is being built on, here's the kind of requirements for that, and then create an archive. And just to kind of show why we do this, what is it not like? Oh, because I skipped my step before to create the dir. There we go. And so if I look at the archive that I just created, with almost no actual functionality, this archive is almost a megabyte. And so typically, when you're doing an archive, you don't want to commit that into a Git repo because size adds up if you're committing something in every build. So typically you would put that somewhere else, and I just kind of put a fake command here of copying it to some folder, but typically you'd upload it, FTP, whatever, SCP out to some server, or upload it, in more modern tooling to a tool like Artifactory or AWS's Code Artifact, things like that. So this is kind of what we used to do in the pre-Docker days. And then you have your install scripts when you get out to the actual server where this is going to run, and then you have to download that archive and unzip it, and then you have a run script to tell it what to actually run. So all these different pieces of information, in the case before the whole DevOps movement, developers might not understand the environment where this is running. Operations people might not understand all the application requirements. That's why Docker became a really powerful paradigm to kind of bring the two together. So this is where Docker comes in handy. So I'm going to start by adding a Docker file. And just kind of really simple, starting with from Node, And then I'm just using a recent version, can't remember what I was going with, 21.6. And I'm using the slim tag mostly for the sake of time in it, trying to download the image, so I'm not wasting too much time on that. And then I'm just setting the work dir to /app just for my own purposes and simplicity in the commands. And then basically all I want to do is copy my files from my current directory into /app. And then I need to do an npm install to get the dependencies in this Docker image. So I'll do a run command, npm install, and then tell the Docker image that the command I want to run when it starts up is node index.js. So fairly simple Docker image, nothing crazy about it. Just kind of here's the steps to build it, here's the command that it takes to run it. So now I can come and actually build that Docker image. So I'll do a Docker build, and then I'm going to just give it a tag of node build image, or build talk. And then the current directory is what I want to build, and it will find the Docker file and copy all the files in. So I'm going to go and run this fresh build. It's downloading the base image, and then now it is running some different steps. And yeah, so here we got the base image, it ran my copy, it ran npm install, and then that finished building the image. So now I can run this image. I'm not going to spend time running it because I'm focusing on the process of building and some efficiencies in how you build your images. But I could go and do a Docker run command for that. So let me come back over here just to kind of catch up in the README. And so I built my Docker image. Just a note, if you're building stuff with Docker, you probably want to add some stuff to your Docker ignore file. And so what I just did, it actually copied everything in my directory, including the node modules folder. And you could ignore these other folders here. This was just kind of each step in this process as I was working through it. But all of that got copied into the Docker image. That makes it a lot larger than it needs to be. For example, let's look at our image. So it's 200 megabytes is what is in the image, and eventually the node modules will be in the image because we're going to install them internally. But for example, if I'm building on a Mac and the Docker image is running on Linux, there might be some native thing in my node modules directory that's built for Mac that won't work on Linux. So that's why you typically don't want to copy node modules in directly into your image, like from your host machine. So I'm just going to rebuild this, with the Docker ignore there. It took a little while to run initially. We're running the npm install, which in this case takes 4 seconds. In a normal project, it may take 30 seconds. It may take 2 minutes. If you're in a very large project, you might be waiting 5 or 6 minutes. That's really what I want to focus on here is, if you have a build that takes 30 seconds a minute, trying to speed it up may not be worth the effort. But when you get into the multi-minute territory and you have a team of people and a CI process that's running that build 50 times a day, shaving off 30 seconds makes a huge difference. So that's what I'm going to focus on in kind of the rest of the talk of how do you take a simple Docker build and make it blazing fast in almost every scenario, including on a fresh build machine with no cache. So basically the worst case scenario. And you can actually make it just as good as having a full cache built image locally. So just gonna kind of demonstrate something here. So I'm gonna go into my index file and just change what this is returning. And then I'm going to rerun the build, and just to kind of demonstrate what happens here. So I just changed some source code, and oh, sorry, I didn't save it. That's why I was like, why did it cache that? Cool. So it reran the npm install. So if you notice here, it says it used the cache for this statement because that didn't change. And then it had to rerun the npm install. I didn't change any dependencies, so that's kind of dumb. So that's the first thing that is worth optimizing in this Docker build, is when I change source code, I shouldn't have to rerun npm install. Docker has this really cool feature, which, fun fact, the original version of Docker didn't do this. Each layer in your Docker file, so each instruction translates to a layer, and that layer is given an ID that is a content hash. So it's based on what is in that particular instruction, and different instructions have different things that kind of go into that hash. But for example, if I am copying this directory, if no files in this directory have changed, Docker knows that it doesn't need to rebuild that layer. It can just use what's in its cache. And that's what's really powerful, is you have this kind of generic tool that knows how to cache things based on the content. The downside of that is sometimes you actually want it to run even if the file contents haven't changed, so you have to be careful to, not get in a situation where you think a command is running and it's not actually running because it's using the cache. In this case, I do want it to cache. So one handy trick is we can copy the package.json file into our /app directory. And I'm going to also copy the package lock because typically if you want your dependencies locked, you also want that. And I'm going to move my npm install up. So essentially what I've done here is I've copied just the package JSON and package lock, which is what I need to run the npm install. Then I run the npm install. And so now that part can be cached, and if a different file changes, it won't invalidate these layers being cached. So if I go and run this just to rebuild it as a baseline, it will have to run the npm install because I changed the Docker file commands. And so that time it ran pretty much the whole thing. The base image download is already cached, but everything else it ran. But now if I go and change this to good afternoon and rerun, it should cache the npm install. So it cached this. So now I just saved 6 minutes if that's how long it took to do the install. And that works locally, it works on a build machine. That's something that's really simple that can speed up a build. And for example, like if you create a new branch off the main branch and then you're running a CI build, if the dependencies are already there and haven't changed, and you're building on a build machine that has built that main branch, like that cache is valid for that branch that you're building. So it can be really advantageous even across branches if you're just making a source code change and not changing any dependencies. And then just to demonstrate that it actually works the way that it should, I'm going to bump this version to 1.1 and show that it actually does rerun the npm install. In this case, I didn't change an actual dependency, but the way that this is working, if there's any changes in the package.json file, it will rerun the npm install. You could probably get more narrow and make it so it only works if you change actual dependencies. Not really worth the complexity and effort in most cases. So that's kind of one helpful optimization, optimizing the npm install. The next step is that's great, but now every time I change package.json, I'm in a Docker image, and with the Node.js Docker image, or just Node.js in general, there's a cache that npm has. So when you do an npm install on a machine, it will download whatever dependencies into kind of a global folder on the machine, and then either copy or link them, depending on the strategy you're using, into this particular project. When you're in a Docker image, you lose that because every time you're building that image, it's a fresh image with no cache. And so that's another layer of caching that can be really advantageous. And thankfully, there's a fairly simple Docker feature for that. There's this option you can mount in a Docker file run command. You can add a volume mount. And there's a special type of mount called a cache mount that basically is a volume that Docker manages for you and you don't have to think about. And so in this case, in the Docker image, the /root.npm is what the cache directory is. That's the default. You can set it to something different. I'm just going to use the default for this. So I'm just going to come in and add the mount option here. So we're going to do a type cache, and target is /root.npm. And it is really weird here that you're like doing mount equals and then type equal, like kind of subtyping, but that's the way that it is. And so you just kind of get used to it. So now, and it's kind of hard to tell with only a single dependency that takes about 4 seconds to install, if it actually makes a difference to do this. In a longer project, you could see that instead of it taking 2 minutes, maybe it takes 1 minute or 30 seconds because the download step is already done. So in this case, it took 2 seconds, so 3.7 I think is what it was before, to 2 seconds to run the npm install. So a little bit faster. Same semantics that if there's no changes, if I rerun this again, it will cache that npm install step. If I go in here to the package JSON and change it, then it will rerun it. But now it's not having to download the dependency freshly. It's on a volume on my computer that is mounted as it's running that Docker build. So slightly faster. In this case, it actually took 5.4 seconds. Blame it on this old laptop that is sometimes slow. Yeah. So at this point, we have a Docker build that does pretty good on running builds on my local machine in different scenarios. If I were in a scenario, just to kind of demonstrate, if I wanted to make sure that the cache is not used because I'm experiencing some weird issue, you can just add a no cache flag, and then it will run the whole build without the cache. So that is helpful because sometimes you're like, something weird is happening, and I think it might be related to the cache. So at this point, this works great, but now I want to set this up with the CI system. Let's say we're working on a team project, and a lot of times you might have a fresh build node every day because you don't want to leave them up overnight to save cost, or maybe for reliability you don't want the same build node sitting up and someone installs some dependency on it and then forgets that it's needed, and then one day AWS decides to take that node down for maintenance and you forget and it breaks all your builds and production goes down. So sometimes we just want a fresh build node so everything is predictable and always consistent. But the problem with that is now we don't have that Docker cache. So every day I get a new build node and the first build has no cache and is the slowest possible build. And once again, for a short build, that doesn't really matter. When you get into a much longer build, any amount of time you can shave off makes a difference. So Docker a little while back added a feature, and when I was working on this talk, I actually noticed they had made some strides since I had first worked with this feature. You can actually set up, Docker will allow you to embed that cache information into the Docker image. And so typically with a Docker image, you're pushing it to a registry somewhere, maybe Docker Hub, maybe a private registry in your cloud provider or somewhere else. And so that cache information can live in that image, and you can reference a remote image in a Docker registry when you're running your local build. And so what's really cool about that is Docker can basically figure out there is an image somewhere out in a registry that is already built that has the content hashes that I need for this local image. And so it can prevent building those particular layers locally when they already exist somewhere else. So that's the next piece to add here. So I'm changing things a little bit here. So I'm logged into Docker Hub, my personal Docker Hub. Just kind of show here that I have, I previously pushed an image to test this and then I deleted the tag. So I have no tags here remotely currently. And so if I go and build, so I'm going to change things a little bit from how I'd planned to do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is build this image with this cache from option here. So maybe I'll just start from what I had. So there's, so if I do a cache from and then give it an image, and so in this case I'm just prefixing it with my user. And it will build it locally because there is no image remotely. In this case, I already had a build cache locally as well. And so if I didn't have it built locally, it would have had to do a fresh build, which I will skip over that for the sake of time. But so here, there's the cache from option, which basically specifies load the cache from this remote registry. And you'll notice that I just gave it the name of a Docker image. I didn't specify the tag. It will default to the latest tag. I can give it a specific tag if I want to reference something specific. So in this case, what I want to do first is kind of build and push a cached image to kind of show the scenario of I'm a fresh machine with no Docker cache. There's an image somewhere on the registry. So this build will run very fast because I already have the local cached stuff, but I basically just tagged an image with a cache tag. And you can name this whatever you want. One cool thing, you can have a single cache tag for your repo. You could have a cache tag per branch if you wanted to get more fine-grained. You can kind of choose how complicated you make your caching tags. You can specify multiple tags if you want kind of try the specific branch cache and then try main. There's many different options there. And then I'm just going to push up this image to Docker Hub. And then, so now that's up in Docker Hub, I can reload this, and we can see that I have my cache tagged image here. And you don't have to use like cache. You could have like the normal tagging mechanism that you do. It's just kind of nice to identify this is kind of used for this purpose. So now I'm going to go and kind of clear the images off my machine. I'm just going to do an image prune because this is the only image that I have on here currently. Don't recommend doing this unless you want to reclaim a lot of space on your machine. Why is it capital A? No. Okay. Docker images. Definitely has images. Why is it not wanting to prune? We'll just copy my specific command here. There we go. So those are just some dangling images. So I have a fresh machine. There's no Docker images on it. And so now I can come and show kind of what this would be like. I'm running a Docker build. I'm telling it to cache to inline just because, typically you're using the same build to generate an image with the cache as checking if there's a remote cache. So that's why it has both of the arguments here. Oops, that wraps around. And then I'm just giving it the built image a different tag of latest just for kind of clarity and distinction here. So I'm going to go and build this, and it should take like a very short amount of time. Yeah, so it took 3.8 seconds. A couple things to note here. So, it's loading the Docker file. It's loading the metadata for Node Slim. So it loaded the metadata, not the actual image. It didn't download the base image. It's loading my Docker ignore file. And then it's importing the cache manifest from this remote image that I specified. And so it basically just has that context now locally. And then it has, this is the from stage, and then you can see all of the stages were cached. So it didn't actually build anything locally. It didn't even pull down that remote image. It basically just determined that it has the context there. So now I have an image that's been built here, basically just from that. And here it is doing a pull token, so maybe it was just really fast in pulling that actual image. But there are some features where it actually doesn't even pull the remote image, depending on some of the parameters that you can pass to copy. But yeah, so just to kind of demonstrate, I'm going to change something in the index file again, and just kind of show like a normal build with this setup. So it goes really fast, and then it basically just runs that copy stage. All I did was change source file. The only thing that actually happened to the build was it copied new source files into the image, done. Only do the work that it actually needed to do. And then similarly, if I change something in the package.json, then it will end up rerunning that step. Yeah, so there's many other improvements that could be made here. I kind of left some things out of scope just to not make this have too many elements to it. Common thing is using multi-stage builds to install all your dependencies, run tests, and then have a final image that only has the production dependencies and doesn't have any of the test source code in it, to keep your image really small, or if you're building a front-end project, to have a Node.js image for running your build, and then maybe you serve it from an Nginx image or something like that, if you're running a Docker container in production, versus hosting on Vercel or something like that. One of my favorite things is to use a build arg to inject the Node.js version. So in this repo, I have an NVMRC. If you don't use NVM, really easy way to manage different node versions. And I hate having to update the version in NVMRC and a Docker file. So you can specify a build arg parameter to inject that version, and then you just pass that through in your Docker build command, which typically you're going to have some script, either an npm script or a shell script, that will have your actual build command with those arguments. So it becomes a really easy way. You just have that build script cat the contents of NVMRC, and then pass that in as the build arg. So one less thing to update. And then, of course, you'd add tests, and there's some different patterns for updating or for running tests either as part of the Docker file in the build, and then if you're wanting to like extract a test run report, that's a little bit trickier from the built image, but there are some handy tricks for doing that. Or you can build a different test target in the like a multi-stage Docker image, and then at runtime run your tests and copy the file out of there. So some different options there. And then at the bottom of here, I've linked some resources. These are just in the Docker documentation on the different caching mechanisms, and it has, this is just scratching the surface of the different options for where you can kind of store that cache information for an image. So yeah, so that's my talk. Any questions?
Questions?
Are there any gotchas that you can think of regarding the cache size? For example, going over a certain limit or anything like that?
Yeah, so in this case, the cache is mostly metadata about your image. Obviously, if you've built a bunch of images locally, you're going to get a bunch of size over time, and that's why little things like using the slim version of Node or ideally even Alpine. I was just trying to find something in the middle for this particular project. So yeah, I think the cache isn't necessarily the problem. It's more just having lots of images, and I have been known to hit a point where my laptop is slow and just wipe out everything, images, volumes, containers. Just I think most of us have probably hit that point where you're just like, it's probably Docker that's killing my machine. So yeah, you definitely have to be careful just in general. I'm not sure with the cache info being embedded there, I don't know that changes it significantly unless you're dealing with really, really lean images, but even then it's mostly metadata.
Great question. Other questions?
Thank you. With regards to your cache, near the end of the presentation, you briefly mentioned running your cache inline. Could you talk about that argument?
Yes. Let me actually pull up their, I think it's this doc. So there's a bunch of different options for kind of the cache backend where it's stored. So, inline, kind of from the previous question, you're already pushing an image somewhere. There's a simplicity to not having, actual image and cache metadata separate from it for everything. So, if you were just doing a single cache image for each repo, then maybe storing it in a separate image, which is kind of what this registry option would make sense. If you're trying to kind of correlate with each branch, to me, there's just a complexity that there's just with separating it, so it's easier just to put it in line. And then, local is kind of what essentially kind of the default that it just kind of does is like it works on your machine. When you push an image up, that cache info is no longer there. So inline just gives you a little bit of benefit of now if someone else pulls that image down or references that image, you kind of have the cache info associated with it. Something too, sorry, that made me think of too. If you have two different Docker files that have the same commands in them and the same base image, that cache is actually shared because the content is the same. So that's the real advantage here. You have 5 API projects that all essentially have the same base instructions. You get the efficiency of the caching under the hood. Thanks.
Awesome. Other questions? Oh.
So I don't have a lot of experience with Docker Hub. Most of the Docker stuff I do is just like locally, but I have used GitHub Actions. Is this online cache thing specific to Docker Hub, or are some of the other hosts? Because I know you can host images on GitHub and stuff like that. Yeah. Do they have caching available there too? Do you have any experience with that? Or?
I haven't played with that specifically, for GitHub. Image registry, but it's part of the registry spec. So I think you have to have a new enough version of it, but it's been out for a little while now. So yeah, pretty much anything that can store Docker images should be able to do this unless you're on a really, really old registry.
Cool.
Any others?
If you go back to the code where you were building with cache, there was the type argument, and then there was something about the root, I think.
In the Docker file, this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is that target? Can you segment stuff? Is that for categorizing or?
What is the actual folder or the
the
target
folder, the root.
parameter?
So
yeah. So in the Docker image, the node Docker image, the root user is the kind of default user, and that's a whole separate talk about whether you should be running an image as root. Leave that aside. And just the default configuration for npm in that image is to use, /root that root user's home directory .npm. And so typically there can be a kind of system folder for it, or it can be in your home directory .npm for the npm cache. So it's just kind of that's what it is in that image.
Other questions? Going once. All right, last one.
It's not really even a question. I just want to check my own understanding, because like this seems great, because I have worked at companies and on apps where the builds are just like, not only do they take forever to deploy, then once they're running in CI, like the build just takes forever again. So with this idea of like also being able to cache locally, does that mean that potentially when you build the image locally, like right before you deploy, if you've built with like the correct like prod envs and stuff like that, on the CI server, is it at that point just going to use the cache even that was built on your machine? Is that accurate to say?
You would have to push that cache somewhere else. Okay. So if you had a scenario where you wanted to be able to build an image locally and have a CI machine use the benefits of that, you could just push it to the same image registry that CI machine is referencing to check the cache.
Cool.
So
yeah, sounds awesome. All right, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, y'all. Awesome talks. Thank you both for speaking today. Awesome audience as well. Great questions, everyone. You have respected the spatula of speaking very well as well. I just want to say I appreciate that. We will be having another meetup in a month, around the same Tuesday. So please come to that. We're probably going to do multiple talks, maybe even a series of lightning talks, to be determined. A couple of things I want to let you know before I release you from the prison that is your chair. There are a few pieces of pizza back there. 1 gluten-free, like 8 cheese pizzas, 2 jalapeno. Please take those. If no one takes them, we will have to throw them away because we don't eat cheese. So please, please, please take those. Let's see, if you are wanting to help with chairs, just a note that these lighter gray chairs that are scattered amongst you, they actually have to go in the top rack because they will scrape the floor otherwise. Yeah, and then please feel free to mingle, visit a little bit. We're gonna try to get out of here at
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
One more thing though.
Yes.
Tell people to submit talks.
Oh, yes. DenverScript.com. You can submit a talk. And I want to be very clear that you do not have to be an expert at something. You do not have to really know how to do something, although both of our speakers tonight were kind of experts and knew how to do things. You might want to tell us about your journey learning something, or maybe learn something new and tell us about it, or maybe you want to tell us your opinions. All of those things are valid, and we would love to hear from you. Awesome.
Yes, and just keep an eye on DenverScript.com and Meetup.com, because if we do lightning talks, we'd love to see your talks submitted. So thanks, and have a good night.